Hi everyone, Robert Peak here from the Spontaneous Dungeon Master, and I'm really keen to just dive in this series and give you the practical tools and examples that are going to help you prepare sessions very quickly and effectively and build up this toolkit that's going to give you confidence to be more and more spontaneous in your sessions. But first, I just need to step back a little bit, and I feel like I need to explain some of how this all came about and acknowledge some of the great existing work out there that this is building on as a foundation. So I'm going to put links in the description for all of this, so you can access go to the source on all of this as well. Back in the day, as a kid, I had this wonderful map of the Forgotten Realms from the gray box up on my bedroom wall, and I would just spend summers sort of daydreaming about these wonderful places and creatures and locations to explore and the politics of it all and just everything. I was writing, I was drawing, I was creating a lot more content than I could ever possibly use in actual gaming sessions. And fortunately, I had other ways of sharing that stuff with my friends and talking about it and so forth, because what I came to discover is it's really fun to create, but it's not nearly as much fun if there's no one to share it with. Right? So these days, flashing forward as an adult, I spend a lot more time working on the game than in the game. By that I mean working in the game is, preparing a custom monster for a particular session. Working on the game is thinking about what makes it really interesting to encounter a new and different monster. What is that? What are the kind of strategies or approaches that'll help me create that experience for myself and the players in the future, right? So it's bumping it up to a kind of meta level in a way, thinking at that level. We're doing a lot of that in this kind of video series. That's the idea. So I still like to pour myself into prep, even though I can do it in only a few minutes. I'm still spending a lot of time out of game thinking about and preparing things. But more and more, I've been working on tools and methods that help me reliably and repeatably create good sessions and run fun sessions, rather than pouring myself into the specifics and details of any one particular session. This is because what I've discovered is fun happens in the moment, and the most fun happens at the table. So working on the game helps me be more comfortable being spontaneous in the moment. It brings me present. It brings me more fully to the table, so that I'm spending the most time kind of in the moment, interacting, having fun with the players. So there's three really key resources that have helped me in this journey, in this kind of quest that I've been on to figure out how to be more spontaneous as a dungeon master. The first, probably the most important one to mention, is the Lazy Dungeon Master. And the latest book is The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Mike Shea, aka Sly Flourish. This, I think, broke ground for a lot of us who are dungeon masters with kind of adult lives and jobs and limited time, pointing out all the places where we potentially waste time, or at least put our time into activities that don't show up at the table very much, or don't have a huge impact on the table experience, and conversely, more importantly, showing us where we really can maximize our impact on the fun of the game in the preparation process. So this was huge shout out to Mike, who I think has really kind of changed the game for the better, for me anyway. When I came across this became my methodology for a long time for how I get ready for sessions. The next one, which is a real surprise to me, is something called the Solo Adventurer's Toolbox. I wish I'd known that solo adventuring was possible when I was younger, when I was a kid, because what I resorted to was things like video games, where a lot of the content was created for me, right? The graphics, the writing. It's not that collaborative experience that you get at the table, but the idea behind the Solo Adventurer's Toolbox is that you can actually play both sides of the table using good tables, using curated lists that you can use to deploy random events and circumstances, and a little system for figuring out kind of yes, no, maybe in response to questions, almost a kind of magic 8-ball approach to interrogating your virtual dungeon master, if you like. But this really showed me the power of having curated lists and tables, and having sparks and seeds of ideas that can help to run the game, as it were, without so much effort from the actual dungeon master. So you can be really present with what's going on. The last one, really I've been getting kind of by proxy in a way from my wife. My wife's an amateur improvisational actress, She studies under a guy named Remy Bertrand in London, who a lot of his work is based on this really foundational book in the improvisation community called Impro by Keith Johnstone. He's the guy. He's the guy that we get the say yes and idea from, right? He's the one that did that. But he has a lot more of other interesting things to say about all of this as well. You know, what's happening in the moment is way more interesting than your concepts about what could be happening. So you don't show up on stage with a big preconceived idea. You show up and you really show up and you see what's going on and you go from there. So it's a lot about opening the possibilities rather than closing them down. That's the spirit of it as I see it. Seeing things like really as they are rather than through sort of your conditioning of how you think things ought to go. That's a lot more powerful. That's a lot more interesting to watch, and that's a lot more interesting to be involved with. Something that my wife's teacher often also says, you know, is that when you're really in it, when you're really in a difficult situation, make it more difficult, right? Really throw yourself into that. Really see, you know, throw yourself into the unknown, into complications, into difficulties, and let that, you know, and let that guide you. We want conflict. Don't avoid it. So these three things kind of fused all together in my brain, along with elements of my own background. So I'm a poet. I have several books out in print, and you know, one of the big ideas in poetry is to show rather than to tell, right? And one of my mentors put stuff in your poems. Put stuff in your poems. Don't put ideas in your poems. Don't put concepts in your poems. Don't put adjectives in your poems. Don't tell people how they ought to be feeling about a thing. Put the stuff in there, the actual concrete stuff. So this leads into something I call noun-based preparation. And also I learned a lot through poetry that it's really important to prompt yourself creatively. Creativity doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You really need something to spark off of, right? Nobody just goes up to a comedian and says, say something funny. Or if they do, it's like, well, give me something to work with. Like, what, you know, about what, right? So prompting yourself is a big key to keeping the creativity flowing. And that, you know, we get into a lot of how you can use tools to help you prompt a creative approach. I'm also trained as a computer programmer. Programmers, you know, the best ones are lazy, right? We want the system to do the work. We want the system to do the hard stuff and the heavy lifting. We don't want to have to do a lot of stuff manually. This is part of why this idea of having a toolbox that I can rely on to prompt me to run a lot of the mechanics, to create stuff, to build stuff, to you know, to let me sort of pick and choose in the moment. So that I can be more present and spontaneous with what I'm doing. This led to an approach I call structured winging it, right? So you're winging it, but you have this structure under you that helps you be confident in winging it. So these are two things that we'll unpack a lot more, give some examples of. I'm going to share my own toolkit of what I do to create structured winging it and encourage you to kind of season your own one to taste. Noun-based preparation is a lot about the strategy, the overview of things. It's about how to prepare games in about the same amount of time as it might take a player to level up and check their spells. Structured winging it is more the tactics and more the implementation of all of this, how to play the game so you're almost just as surprised as your players about what's going to happen next. So some of the big reasons you might want to do this is, you know, to avoid that whole thing of dungeon master burnout, which is real. To have more fun, to become a kind of a better dungeon master or a more resourceful, available dungeon master, a dungeon master that's able to play anytime, anywhere. You know, give me 15 minutes in my trusty resource book, and you know, give me a theme or a mood or a couple ideas or something you may want to explore or experience, and we can play a session. That sounds enticing and appealing to you, that level of spontaneity and being in the moment and the kind of wonderful roller coaster ride that is not exactly knowing what's coming next, but having the confidence to go with it and to go with it fully with the players. If the idea of adventuring really all together, that you're all on this adventure together, you're not just the dungeon master sort of preparing the meal for other people to eat. If that seems at least enticing or exciting, stick around. Again, we're going to go into a lot more practical detail about how you can do all that.